Let me ask you another one, because I think this is another maneuver you tried to make to get out of what the prophecies were showing you. And that was to say that Jesus maneuvered. That he saw these prophecies and said, well, hey, I'm close to this thing. Maybe I could fit in. Like the prophecy that says that, the wicked people would turn against him. Maybe he just went and got around some people he thought were good candidates and did enough to make them angry so they would turn against him. And kind of fit into the prophecies in a way that would make him look like the Messiah.
Right. I thought about that. I thought about Zechariah 9:9 that says that the Messiah would ride a donkey into Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see him getting his disciples around, say, hey, go get me a donkey, because I'm anxious to ride in Jerusalem, fool people into thinking I'm the Messiah, because I really want to be tortured to death here. So, go get me a donkey. He could have done that. I mean, theoretically, there are some of the prophecies that he could have maneuvered his life to fulfill. But you look at the scope of them, and many of them, there's no way he could have arranged. He couldn't have arranged his ancestry. He couldn't have arranged his place of birth. He couldn't have arranged that his bones remained unbroken on the cross, unlike the two being crucified with him. He couldn't have arranged for soldiers to be gambling for his clothing, to be betrayed for a certain amount of money by a friend, those sorts of things. And how does he fulfill Daniel when it talks about when specifically he would enter into human history? There's just too many of these that he could not have intentionally arranged his life. Not to mention the resurrection, performing miracles, and so forth. So I had to chalk that one off as just another grasping at straws to try to explain all this away. But there's a related one to this, Mark, and that is some people say, well, maybe the gospel writers fabricated some of this stuff. For instance, in Micah, I think it's 5:2, it says that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. Well, maybe the writer Luke, who wrote the gospel by his name, said, gosh, we got a problem here. Jesus was really born in Nazareth, but why don't we say there was like a census? Yeah, that's it, a census. And the census took him and Mary, while she was pregnant, to Bethlehem, and that's where they had the baby. Yeah, that's it. And so maybe they fabricated things and rewrote history a bit to make it look like these prophecies were fulfilled. I hear that objection a lot. I mean, does that make sense?
Well, from a distance, it can start to sound a little intimidating till you realize these things were reported while all the eyewitnesses were still around.
Right.
And so, it would make sense if we were talking about one of the apocryphal Gospels, like the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, all these writings that came much later. They could make stuff up because none of the eyewitnesses were around anymore.
And they did.
They absolutely made things up, and that's why those aren't considered part of the canon of Scripture. They were later writings with all kinds of fabrications and so forth. The problem is these writings, the writings of the Gospels, the writings of the Apostles, Paul and Peter and others, were written early. They were written when the eyewitnesses, the other people that were there, were still alive, and would be able to say, what are you talking? It'd be like me saying to you right now, well, isn't it great that the Seattle Seahawks won the Super Bowl?
Would have been.
Well, I could say, now, I may be able to fool you into some team that I say won back in 1909 or something, because you weren't around, you don't remember. But when I'm talking about the most recent Super Bowl, and I start telling you something, you're going, that's not what happened. They lost. Well, that's because you were there, and that's what we have with the Gospels.
Yeah. So there's checks and balances.
Yeah, and add to that fact, the fact that these disciples, these people who wrote down the accounts in Scripture of what happened, were willing to lay down their lives. And we know from history that most, if not all of them, ended up dying, all except John, for what they had written, and they knew whether or not it was true or not. It's like you said, Jesus, coming into town saying, I want to be, crucified. Well, why would they want to make up a story and then stand for it all the way to their death, and in many cases a very gruesome death, for what? For the sake of a lie. It just doesn't make any sense at all.